Okay, well, it ended up being that I had to come up with the part 4. I had to leave the last recording before I was able to finish. So it actually works out better this way since it's a smaller video and you can catch your head. So the part 3, it's about what is the fuel and kind of which fuel some muscle cells tend to use more than others is going to play a role. And then when we talk about this one, about red fibers, white fibers, slow twitch, fast twitch, and some of that stuff. All right. So again, ATP is one of the key things a cell needs to contract. And how a cell makes ATP is going to influence, again, that cell's ability to generate a certain amount of force in a very quick amount of time and giving a lot of force production, but maybe not a lot of endurance because it's not going to be enough time to burn fuel and use oxygen, versus for lower intensity but maybe sustainable types of contraction and intensity events, the muscle fibers have the ability to burn a variety of fuels, utilize a lot of mitochondria and oxygen to then convert and make fat, glucose, and protein into energy. And as the intensity of the activity increases, the fat and the protein can't quite compensate for that. So that's why glucose becomes the preferred fuel and will start to be utilized more and more and more. And eventually you get to this place where you max out all of your oxygen making ATP systems. And again, I'm simplifying this as much as I can. And the pyruvate will accumulate from the glucose breakdown, and your system's going to kind of try to keep glycolysis going and make pyruvate into lactic acid. And lactic acid as an acid is going to potentially start to slowly make the cytoplasm, the sarcoplasm, the muscle fibers, and the extracellular environment more acidic. And so you start to then have other issues related to acidity and proteins and maintaining that level of output in ATP production. Okay? So that's kind of where we left off in part 3. So part 4, again, you're asking a muscle to do a certain amount of contractions, produce a certain amount of force over and over and over again. And if the muscle is no longer able to produce that force for that time, for that amount of energy being available to it, we say the muscle can become fatigued. Okay, so the muscle is no longer, by definition, able to perform a required activity. All right, so I am no longer able to maintain my max speed in a 100-meter dash. I am no longer able to maintain my max force production in my bicep muscle. Okay, and the reason why muscles fatigue is going to be a few reasons. One, they can fatigue because you run out of acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction. So that would be a form of fatigue where there's a neurological issue. So you don't have the neurotransmitter to continue to tell the muscles to be excited, release calcium, and contract. Okay? That's not the normal way that things get fatigued, but it can happen. Again, if we ask a muscle cell to do a maximal output and we don't give the neurons lots of groups to become a part of to maintain that muscle contraction, and they all have to be part of 1 or 2 groups, again, they might run out of acetylcholine faster that way. And so that's why you might see that neurological fatigue hit. Okay. Another reason why things are going to fatigue, and this is what we normally think of when we think about like running a marathon, is you run out of the ATP making ability in a given second to meet the demands. So the intensity you're trying to maintain is not sufficient with the amount of ATP you're able to make in a given second. And so this is where you've asked every mitochondria to open every lane of traffic, and every lane of traffic or every checkout counter is working at its fastest rate to burn fat and burn pyruvate, but you still don't have enough ATP, and so the checkout lines are accumulating, and specifically the pyruvate is accumulating, and you're trying to keep glycolysis going and get some of that pyruvate to convert to lactic acid, but now lactic acid is changing the temperature of the room, so it's becoming really hot and nasty and uncomfortable. And so again, you're not going to be in optimal working conditions, and so your ATP will not be able to continue to meet the demands of the tissue, and something's going to have to give. Either the muscle is going to have to come down in the effort level to the level that the ATP is there to meet the demand, or it's going to stop, okay? And so in a marathon race, or even in any race, this is like, I am trying to give 100% effort, and I'm trying to get myself to run as fast as I can for as long as I can. But you see this in like the 400 and the 800. But it's like, as I come down the home stretch, even I'm trying my best to kick to the finish line, I can't continue to keep that pace. And so you see that I start to like slow down and seize up, and that's happening when I'm fatigued because I don't have enough of my glycogen and glucose available to keep pyruvate and keep glycolysis running to give me that extra ATP. Okay. Now, when all of the ability to make ATP, because you run out of fuel, you run out of the glycogen and the glucose, and so you can only have a certain amount of ATP for what you can make with fat, and the pyruvate's still there. That's going to be a certain amount of intensity that you can then maybe continue to maintain. All right? But even that is going to stress the system because you are now not utilizing the most preferred fuel. And the most preferred fuel for a little while was making all of these metabolic waste products that were changing the chemistry of the water in your cells. And that chemistry and that change in the water of your cells can start to damage membranes. And membranes such as the sarcolemma of a muscle cell can be damaged, which is going to be a problem for calcium holding, as well as the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is where the calcium is supposed to be sequestered, can get damaged. And so when you start to see damage at that intracellular level because of the fuel not being available and the crazy things your body does to make ATP when it doesn't have the fuel it needs and the oxygen it needs, that can lead to muscle damage and issue. All right? And again, all of these things spilling out into the extracellular environment around the muscle is going to potentially trigger neurons in that area to see a different temperature, to see a different potassium, a different calcium ion level, and that can start to trigger pain receptors and then muscles exhausting because of, again, changes to its anatomy, changes to its physiology at a cellular level. Okay? And so some of this stuff is not catastrophic. Some of it is a natural part of not having enough ATP available, and your muscle is going to then try to recover when your intensity diminishes, and it can try to compensate a little bit and make up for the lack of ability of maintaining that high input. And so the recovery period after you've asked the muscles to do an activity for an extended period of time or do a high intensity activity for a short period of time, you're going to see that the immediate recovery time, and you see that with runners, like they still have a high breathing rate. They're recovering the oxygen to continue to burn pyruvate and fat that have been mobilized to the muscle cells to continue to provide ATP and recuperate and recycle some of the maybe crazy cellular waste products you generated when you were trying to maintain that activity and were running out of the ability to do so. All right, and so the initial recovery period, one of the big things, especially with high-intensity activity, is we got to get that lactic acid back into something that is usable, and we want to get it back to pyruvate, and in some cases get it back into glucose, so then we can maybe store it as glycogen. And the cycle that does this is known as the Cori cycle. Most of this is going to take place in the liver, and so this is one of the reasons, in theory, that accumulation of pyruvate, making it into lactic acid. The lactic acid doesn't stay in the muscle. It goes into the bloodstream and it changes whole body pH, and that the reason why it's leaving the muscle is to get to the liver so it can then be remade into pyruvate, and then the liver through gluconeogenesis made back into glucose for release to go back to muscles to be stored as glycogen or to go back to cells and be utilized for energy. Okay. Remember that the person who finishes an activity is breathing hard. Again, a lot of times when you initially started the activity, you developed a deficiency of oxygen. So the theory is that when you finish the activity, you need to kind of make up for that initial oxygen debt with oxygen at the post-activity breathing rate. And so oxygen debt then happens to help, again, get the O2 that initially wasn't available and made us make lactate kind of early in the system. And then oxygen helps us recover the high-intensity lactate that we made later in the activity, again, to put it back to pyruvate. And so when you see someone breathing heavily post-exercise, you call that EPOC, the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, okay? And we've all experienced that, okay? So the takeaway is muscles are going to fatigue because they are going to either run out of fuel, run out of acetylcholine, or they are going to start doing extreme things to try to keep ATP levels as high as possible, to include making lactic acid, changing the pH, making other acids and other poisons to the cell that then start to break the cell, the sarcolemma, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and cause problems. All right? And your cell will try to do a better job next time you ask it to do that activity by having more glucose available and more glycogen, more buffering available, so it doesn't react to the pH changes as quickly. And so that's another thing with training. You see people do a little bit better at maybe not succumbing to the changes at the cellular level from stress of high ATP, high intensity output. Okay. Now, muscle cells are going to be responsive to neurotransmitters and hormones. So muscle tissue is going to respond to the nervous system. We've seen it at the neuromuscular junction, and that's going to make it contract. And it's going to also be sensitive to the hormones of our body, because hormones are not going to maybe make an initial second contraction, but they're going to influence the muscle's ability to contract because they're going to change the muscle physiology. Right? And the key hormones for muscle physiology and growth and adaption are, of course, growth hormone, because growth hormones trigger muscle fibers to increase in size and increase in number of actin and myosin interactions by making more sarcomeres, and more sarcomeres leads to more myofibrils. Growth hormone help push in earlier development myosatellite cells to merge into the muscle fibers that exist to make them longer. It can also trigger more myosatellite cells to converge together to make new muscle fibers. Okay, so growth hormone can do a variety of things that lead to the muscles getting longer and getting bigger. The other hormones, and even to some extent growth hormone, are going to influence not only the muscle fiber size and shape, but with what inside the muscle fiber is going to be available to help it make large amounts of ATP when asked to do a high-intensity activity. And so testosterone, we know people take it to build muscle mass. So we know testosterone, one of its key effects is it makes more actin, more myosin proteins. It does more protein synthesis. And by making more proteins available, more sarcomeres, more myofibrils, the muscle cells actually increase or hypertrophy. They get bigger. All right? And then when you ask that muscle fiber as an individual with 1,000 more actin myosin interactions to contract, it will generate a twitch that is now peaked at one twitch force output, a higher amount of force output. Okay? Other things that testosterone can do, of course, is generate more proteins that are related to glycolysis, so the breakdown of glucose, the breakdown of fat, and so we can make the muscle also better at burning fuel to make ATP because there's more proteins, more enzymes for those processes. Thyroid hormones are going to be a big trigger in getting, again, more of the enzymes and proteins that help us make ATP available, more creatine phosphate, more enzymes in our mitochondria, so we can have, instead of 5 checkout lines per mitochondria, mitochondria, maybe make it 7 checkout lines. So now every mitochondria has more proteins to make more pyruvate into ATP molecules or more fat into ATP molecules. And so the end result is my muscles at resting, at activity, make and produce more ATP, which then lets my muscles utilize more ATP in a given second, in a given moment, so I have more energy being expended and more fuel being burned in a given second. Epinephrine, norepinephrine come from, again, the neurotransmitter of the nervous system, the sympathetic output. They are going to influence the blood flow to organ systems whenever activity is increased. But the other thing they're going to influence in muscle cells is to start pushing that glycolysis and that fuel utilization to make more ATP in a given second. So epinephrine is going to push more of the liver and the skeletal muscle to burn fuel from glycogen breakdown and glucose breakdown. Norepinephrine is actually going to even try to get fat cells to preemptively burn and break down fat to get into the bloodstream so muscle cells can then have more fat available to then make into energy for the moderate intensity activity or even high intensity activity. Of course, there's more cortisol, insulin-like growth factor, estrogens that will influence skeletal muscle, but the big four, and the ones that then people abuse specifically for like baseball players and Olympic athletes are growth hormone and testosterone. And it comes back to because these two hormones are going to make the muscle cells bigger, make the muscle cells have more protein, and having bigger, more protein-rich muscles means when I ask them to contract, I might be able to jump a little higher, throw a little farther, run a little faster than you, and that's the difference between I win and you get second place, and everyone remembers my name and nobody remembers your name. So sponsors, money. Okay? Now, back about 2 lectures ago, we did twitches, and we saw the eye muscle made a twitch, and it happened in a short period of time, and then the gastrocnemius muscle of the calf made a twitch, and it happened a little bit longer than the eye muscle, but still faster than what the soleus muscle did, another calf muscle, which had the longest period of time that the muscle was in a contraction relaxation state, producing force. So when we look at muscles performing like that, we can then start to look at the twitch profiles and categorize muscles that twitch very quickly, and so go through a contraction relaxation in a small amount of time versus a long amount of time as fast twitch and slow twitch fibers. And some fibers, the twitching is not exactly the fastest and not exactly the slowest, so it's in the intermediate. All right, and so that's where we start to label fibers like the eye muscles that move your eye small increments and then have the ability to do it over and over again and make small little contractile changes to your eyes, your eyeball, fast twitch muscles, and then other areas where the muscles are kind of doing a long, slow contraction. And think about your like belly to hold your torso. The tone being maintained might be maintained by muscle fibers that their entire contraction period is like 3 seconds, you know, so they're very slow twitchy. All right, and then intermediate fibers, again, they fall into that middle range where they might twitch very fast or twitch slow, but they're not the fastest and they're not the slowest. Okay? And so when we look at these twitching ability, we also kind of tie into the twitching, well, if the muscle is going to twitch so fast that it produces a lot of energy, a lot of force, but it doesn't really give a lot of time for the muscle to get the energy needed to do that contraction from oxygen consumption, then those fast twitch fibers, you can kind of make the leap that because they need ATP available, but they need it for just a short period of time, that they're going to rely more on ATP coming from the background levels that are there, the creatine phosphate system, and the breakdown of glucose to pyruvate. Things that can be done quickly, generate ATP in a large amount, but don't necessarily need a lot of time to get that ATP available. Whereas your slow fibers, they are going to be, in many cases, the fibers that they're not going to give you a lot of force production in a given twitch, but they are going to be able to generate a decent amount of force production over and over and over and over and over again, because they're going to have an ATP making ability that maximizes the oxygen consumption and what's available, and then are able to keep that going in ATP production for a high period of time. And intermediate fibers, you train them to be more slow twitch or fast twitch, and that's kind of the theory that we are going with for the book. Okay, so your fast twitch fibers, think about that eye twitch, the amount of time it spends getting calcium to be released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the amount of time it takes actin and myosin to slide over each other and the sarcomeres to shorten, and then the calcium to be put back in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the actin and myosin to go back to the resting sarcomeral length, is all in fractions of a second. And so these muscle cells may have large number of sarcomeres, large number of myofibrils. They may then be able to produce a lot of force on the ligament or tendon or whatever they're pulling on in a given small period of time. So in general, fast fibers tend to be large fibers with lots of actin and myosin. They tend to have a lot of ATP, a lot of creatine phosphate, and a lot of glycogen and glucose ready to burn into pyruvate to make ATP in a very fast method that allows the muscle to contract very strong, very quickly, and then recover. Okay? Now, if you ask this muscle to contract in multiple times, the muscle is not going to be able to maintain the maximal force output for a long period of time. So as an organ system, the muscle is going to fatigue quickly. All right? Fast fibers, fast twitch fibers, we think of sprinters. So Usain Bolt, the 100-meter champion, if we probably looked at his quadriceps and gastrocnemius muscle in his hamstrings, he's got a lot of fast twitch fibers in those muscles, and they allow him to generate a lot of muscle output for a short period of time and go very, very fast, but he doesn't run 400 meters. He doesn't maintain that 100-meter sprint pace for more than 200 to 250 meters. And it's because if the muscles had to keep going at a 100-meter pace for 400 meters, they would fatigue. They would not be able to maintain that ability over and over and over again. Okay? In many cases, your fast fibers, we're going to call those white fibers because they are not going to use a lot of oxygen. The number of mitochondria is not going to be high. So if the number of mitochondria is not high, the need for oxygen to these tissues is not high. So there's not going to be a lot of blood going to these fibers. So the capillary content is a little less robust than what it is in the slow twitch fibers. We're also going to see that the number of myoglobin proteins, which bind oxygen and make the muscle really red, is not going to be there. So that's why they get that white appearance. On the flip side, your slow twitch fibers are going to be the opposite of this. So they are going to have smaller diameters, less number of actin and myosin protein numbers, myofibrils and sarcomeres, but they have a lot of mitochondria, they have a lot of myoglobin to bind oxygen that passes through the high capillary content around it, and so when they're needing to make more energy, they have a lot more oxygen, a lot more mitochondria, within the mitochondria, a lot more checkout lanes to be able to make and burn not only glucose and pyruvate down, but even fat and other fuel sources to make a lot of ATP. Now, they're not as big, there's not as many proteins, so when you ask it to jump, it might not jump as high, but you can ask it to jump over and over and over and over and over again. So you might not be able to jump, you know, up on your desk, you know, a high height, but if you ask it to jump, you know, 3 inches off the ground and you ask it to stay like a jump rope, stay jumping the jump rope over and over and over again, the slow twitch fibers are going to let you do that. Okay? So again, in your person, the slow twitch fibers are going to be more of your red fibers, and you're going to see a larger number of those in potentially people that train to be middle distance runners and distance runners, because you're asking them to not necessarily give you the biggest, hardest kick or jump. You're asking them to give you a moderate kick or jump, but you're asking them to do that moderate kick or jump over and over and over and over and over again. Versus your fast twitch fiber person is your sprinter, who you want them to give you a really hard kick, a really hard jump, and you want them to do it a few times, but not for more than maybe 10 seconds or 20 seconds. Okay? The red fibers get their name because they have a high number of myoglobin, which is a form of kind of like hemoglobin protein that binds oxygen and holds it in the cell, and because it binds like hemoglobin oxygen, it's going to make it very red. And so the red muscles are red because of lots of capillaries bringing hemoglobin and lots of myoglobin there binding oxygen. Versus white, there's less capillaries. So if I count the number of capillaries here, I might find each cell is touching 2 or 3 capillaries. And so I don't have as much blood coming in, even if the arteriole fully dilates, that I would over here, where maybe every red muscle fiber is touching 5 capillaries around it. Okay? And because this cell doesn't have as much oxygen running by it, it's not going to need as much myoglobin to bind oxygen because it doesn't utilize its mitochondria with as many checkout lanes and as many mitochondria inside the cells. Okay? Now, for the theory of intermediate fibers, if you get into exercise physiology, there's a lot going on. For your book, for the most part, intermediate fibers kind of are, at times, look like a slow twitch or look like a fast twitch, but they are fibers that will be adapting. They are the ones that are going to, with training, look like slow twitch if you want to run marathons, or if I want to be a high jumper or a sprinter, they're going to look more like fast twitch because I'm going to train them to work more like a fast twitch fiber or a slow twitch fiber. Okay? If you get into the literature, type 1 fibers are slow twitch, type 2B are the fast twitch. In the middle, there's still 24, 25 other letters of the alphabet. So intermediate fibers can be subcategorized into a variety of ways. The end result is these type 2A, type 2X, type 2Z, type 2H, type 2I, type 2, D are fibers that if you train them with a certain training protocol can look more like fast twitch, type 2B, or more like slow twitch, type 2A. Okay? And these are the fibers that if you stop training for 3 or 4 days, don't retain those adaptions, and then you feel like you lose so much. Okay? So in a given human, we are not like some animals where we have big muscles with lots of fast twitch and lots of slow twitch and only those fibers. We actually have lots of mixed muscles. And so going back to when you ask a muscle to contract, initially the muscle is going to use the motor units that are going to collect the slow oxidative muscle fibers. And so at any given second, your muscle tone, so my muscle tone in my quadricep, the motor units that are maintaining the tone are many of the slow oxidative fibers. All right? Now, if I need myself to stand up and start walking, those slow muscle motor units are going to continue to work and maintain that background tone and maintain that background output of activity. But as I need more demand to climb stairs or run up to a classroom, I'm going to start to recruit my intermediate fibers that might look a little bit more like the slow, and then the ones that are trained to be a little bit more fast, will then be the next level. And then if I need myself to give the maximal amount of output, jump up on my desk and scream because a rat just ran across my toe, I am going to recruit all of the muscle fibers together, and all of those fast glycolytic fibers, which give me a lot of output without using a lot of oxygen and create a lot of ATP and a lot of force, are going to let me be able to create a lot of muscle tension, but I might not be able to sustain that for very long because, again, those motor units are, easily fatigued. All right? Again, for adaption of muscle, anytime I get a muscle to grow, and now grow means I get the number of actin and myosins, the number of sarcomeres to increase, the number of myofibrils to increase, and the diameter of the muscle cell increases. That's known as hypertrophy. And this is what testosterone does to a muscle. This is what growth hormones do to adult muscles, because we don't get the muscles to grow longer. We don't get the muscles to go through mitosis. They don't divide and increase in number. What we do is we stimulate the number of muscles. If we have 1,000 in our biceps, well, let's make those 1,000 in our biceps all a little bigger. And all of them have an extra few actin and myosin interactions. All right? We hypertrophy some of our slow twitch fibers to increase their number of mitochondria, their ability to retain glucose in the form of glycogen. And again, hypertrophy is a process that we see that comes with physical training, with loading, with normal activity, as well as excess activity from exercise and training. Okay? If we don't use the muscle, we are going to start to see that all of those excess actin and myosins that we don't need are going to go away. So we're going to break down excess actin and myosin interactions, excess sarcomeres, excess myofibrils. And we'll actually see the muscle diameter decrease and the number of proteins within that muscle decrease. And that's atrophy. And that can happen when you immobilize a muscle, when you take away gravity, so when you go to space, atrophy happens, immobilization, or just with normal time when we stop doing our activity to exercise. All right? You're going to see all of your muscles decrease in muscle size, and that's atrophy. All right? So our life purpose should be, at certain points, we want to maintain the muscle at whatever level it is and maybe push a little hypertrophy here and there to get a little bit bigger muscles, but we want to try to do enough activity, enough exposure to gravitational forces, and enough movement in our bodies that we don't atrophy. All right? In space, this is a big deal. And then, again, most of our bodybuilders are working very much on this side to try to make the muscle as big as possible and then as pretty as possible without fat on top of it. So the takeaway of all of this chapter is, if you have a certain number, genetically speaking, in every muscle of fast twitch fibers, slow twitch fibers, and intermediate fibers. And your fast twitch and your slow twitch are somewhat set, but those intermediate fibers can be influenced to become more fast twitch or more slow twitch. And whether they are pushed to become one direction or another comes back to, what is the physical activity you demand? Do you demand them by walking a lot, by, moderate to light intensity activity, but for hours at a time during your day? Or do you do high intensity, high output, but maybe only 20 minutes to 30 minutes a day? All right, and the key is those intermediate fibers, the physiological hypertrophy we get of slow twitch, fast twitch, and the intermediate fibers. If we don't continue and maintain that activity and we give it breaks or immobility or take away gravitational forces on them for 3 to 4 days and longer, we will start to see that the increases in those cells no longer are necessary and they'll start to atrophy. And what we want to avoid is so much atrophy that we can't then move our body around. And that, with age and with time, is going to happen to all of us. So with old people in the nursing home, if you're a nurse, if you're an occupational therapist, if you're a physical therapist, your whole goal is to keep them moving, because the minute they lose their mobility, they start to see the muscle atrophy more pronouncedly on their system, and then once they get to a place where they can't produce enough force to move, then their quality of life is going downhill. Okay? All right, we made it through most of skeletal muscle. I'm going to have to do one more lecture to now just compare skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle, going beyond what we did in Chapter 4. But that's basically a lot of Chapter 10, and I am going to stop the recording at this point.